Hey, Patreons, welcome back to the Spotlight. This is our Patreon segment where we get to talk to creators in the pop culture space. I am joined tonight by an esteemed gentleman who worked on my beloved Spider-Man in the 80s and 90s, Jim Salicrup. How are you this evening?
I'm Smurftastic.
Were you one of the few people that went to go see that movie?
No, I hate to admit I haven't seen it yet.
That's okay. You and apparently you and a lot of other people, but it's awesome to have you here. I've really enjoyed talking to a lot of your contemporaries at Marvel, and folks that have worked in the industry at that time. So let's just jump on into it. So you've been in the business for pushing up on 50 years, I would think. Tell me how you got
Past
started.
50 years.
Yeah, tell me.
Started in 72, so
Oh
it's
wow.
been.
Yeah, tell me all about it. How'd you get started?
I keep telling the story, so I'll give you the short version. Otherwise, that'll fill up the whole show. Uh, Basically, I had done stuff for fanzines and even Kids Magazine, which Jeanette Kahn was the co-editor of and the creator, I think. And I sort of, figured out, from reading fanzines and such, if you contact people and send them work, they might actually hire you. And so I'd read enough interviews, I guess, to sort of somehow figure out how Marvel's budgets were. So I sent them a postcard, and on one side I did one of my lousy sketches of the Incredible Hulk, very Herb Trimpe type of Hulk, but in my lousy style. And on the other side I wrote, I'll be your slave. And so what happened was, that somehow it got their attention, and Saul Brodsky was at the time in charge of keeping an eye on all the bills. And Marvel was rapidly expanding in 72, and they were spending a lot of money because they were running late on everything on messengers to bring the original artwork to the Comics Code Authority offices, which were also in New York City. Traditionally, they would just mail it to them, and then the code would mail it on to the printer in Sparta, Illinois. But they were expanding so rapidly and by so much. When Saul looked at the numbers, he realized if they just hired a minimum wage messenger, it would be cheaper. And and that's when my postcard arrived. And I think Roy Thomas, who was by then editor, this is in 72, uh, he knew he was terribly understaffed. So he figured wisely, very enlightened point of view, that if they hire anyone at Marvel, it would really help if they know something about comics. The typical messenger at that point in time was a retired guy who'd be sitting in the reception area smoking his cigar, waiting for the next package to deliver. Not that
Right.
there's anything wrong with that, but when they hired me, they got someone who, they could, jump on all sorts of things for them.
Right.
That's the short version.
And then the rest is history, I'm sure. So that was 72. So
Oh, I
by
was like a pit bull. Once I got my teeth in Marvel's leg, I didn't let go for 20 years.
That's awesome. I love it. So as I'm reading through your history and learning a little bit about, everything that you've done. I mean, again, I'm focusing on Spider-Man because that's me, but I have a background in media myself. I've worked in print when print was a thing, and I worked in radio. And so, I started as a journalist when I was in college. So I'm aware in kind of the broadest sense, really going all the way across of what it means to be an editor. I mean, I edit this program, I record this, I, edit it, and then I publish it. But when you work in comics, what makes being a comic book editor or a group editor as things grew and as Marvel titles had groups, like what all does that encompass? What does that look like in the very specific sense of being an editor?
I think it varies from editor to editor. There are some who and there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, if it's just a job to them, then the idea is, you try to, get the books out on time, make sure they adhere to the, editorial policies of the company and all sorts of other basic functions. If you're, an egomaniac like me or some other editors, uh, we equate the position to being a director in film. Now that changes from title to title. Sometimes it's just if you're fortunate enough to have really brilliant creators, it's just having enough sense to know to hang back and let them do what they're doing and, and have a great time. I would often say when people ask me, what does an editor do? I would say, provide an environment that's conducive to creativity.
Awesome.
Well, I don't mean to sound all fancy schmancy, but I just figured I always felt if my staff and my creators, if we're not enjoying what we're doing, how do we expect the readers to enjoy it? So we knew if we were having fun and enjoying what we were doing, we were having a great time. But yeah, I editing is something that's very mysterious, and I'm almost tempted to write a book about the 10 greatest editors in comics because there's a big difference. I mean, some, like Archie Goodwin, Harvey Kurtzman, and others, Stan Lee, of course, Julie Schwartz, have contributed mightily. Um, but a lot of times we're invisible. I mean, I think that we're somehow taught to be. And, Stan may have been the exception to that rule. But, generally, the idea is that we wanted the work to be upfront. We wanted people to come back for, you know, what's in the comic book itself. Although I have to admit, years ago, I think when I was before I was editing Spider-Man, even I had like the Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and all the titles associated, and even more. I got it was very common that all the creators on those books would be getting tons of fan mail. Remember mail?
No,
And,
I do. Barely.
it was wonderful. The fans were very vocal and saying what they loved or didn't like, et cetera, et cetera. But as I said, it was all for the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, even the colorists and letterers. But one day I actually did get a fan letter, and it was from a fan who couldn't figure out originally why there were some Marvel titles he liked and others he didn't like. So he looked at them very closely and he found the one thing in common was the ones that he liked, and this is just one individual, were all edited by me. So he felt that must be it. So he wrote me a very kind
Oh,
letter, and it meant, it's like even though your name's on the books, it's still sort of an invisible position.
yeah. Do you still have the letter? Did you save it?
Probably somewhere. I'm a hoarder, so I probably have it somewhere. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it's a very tricky thing. You know, in editing, particularly comics, compared to book publishing, you have to be an art director as well. Even though the companies have people listed as art directors, the editors really are the art directors for each title. They're selecting the artist, they're reviewing the artwork, they're requesting art corrections, et cetera, et cetera. So everything from the direction of an individual title to looking at each and every page before they go out, before they're printed. An editor, uh, depending again on who it is, can be extremely hands-on, which I was probably to a fault, or some that are very good at delegating, who might just, have their assistants do a lot of what I did. I felt you couldn't have enough people looking at the stuff. The mistakes always manage to get through somehow, no matter how hard you try.
That's why we have the Marvel No Prize. Absolutely.
Well, not really. That's
Right.
that's another bone of contention. I'll quickly sum
Please.
that up.
Yeah.
That's something that heaven forbid anyone take a joke seriously. Stan started that by saying when people would write in these letters pointing out mistakes, it's like, it's almost like his glib response would be like, "What do you want, a prize?" So the way he phrased it was, "Well, congratulations, you've won a mighty Marvel No Prize," meaning you've won nothing.
Right.
And
Empty envelope.
well, even that originally it was nothing. It literally was, you won no prize, nothing. Then readers would write in saying, I didn't get it. So they sent an envelope that said, this contains your no prize. And there was nothing in the envelope. That didn't even work. So they had to send, because then they'd write in, I got my envelope with the no prize, but there was nothing in it. So what they had to do is put that envelope, that the envelope itself sort of turned into the no prize, and they would put that envelope inside another envelope and then mail it to people. That seemed to solve it. And then folks like Mark Grunwald came along and felt, well, we just can't give nothing to just anyone. They have to earn it. They
Right.
have to explain why, it's not really a mistake. And it just sort of, mutated into that over the years.
Gruenwald, I remember I was a huge fan of his, and if there was anybody I wish I could have met, it definitely would have been his, because his run on Cap was one that I still go back and read. But in one of those issues he did, say that again.
He would have greatly appreciated hearing that. He's
Oh,
someone who, sometimes felt he didn't get the any recognition for his work. So, it's a strange thing. Sometimes you have to just stick around long enough until you meet the people who are out there enjoying
yeah.
what you were.
But very quickly, there was one, it was an issue of Cap where it was a close up of Cap's face and his nose was missing. So Gruenwald put in a letters page when a million people wrote in about it. He said, here's your Cap nose fixing page. And it was a picture of that same panel with a nose with a little broken circle drawn around it so somebody could ostensibly cut it out and paste it in. I thought that was, but he was a very funny guy. That was his reputation.
He was great. He and I had tremendous respect for each other, and we worked together on lots of projects, and it was always a pleasure. We occasionally would bump heads and have our little disagreements, but I think overall there was just a lot of mutual admiration and respect
Yeah.
for.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of projects, somebody that we interviewed on this segment not that long ago was JM, whose last name I will always screw up. So he told us
He pronounces it two different ways.
but he also told us he had a nom de plume that he used when he published a story he didn't like, Wally Lumbago. So that's what I call him. So Wally Lumbago naturally talked about Kraven's Last Hunt, because why wouldn't you? But as I was reading, I find out that was your idea. That storyline was your idea. Is that correct?
No. The title itself
Gotcha.
is my idea. And that title wasn't used until the stories were collected, because it really does sort of give away the ending.
Yeah, that would be tough.
I think DeMatteis's original, or Wally's original title was Fearful Cemetery, sort of a.
And he used that over and over again.
Like poem, yeah, spider burning bright.
Right. That's what an incredible story. I was, to betray my own age, I was 11. It was the summertime. I think I was with my grandparents, and that was one that, even though I think it was before I got subscriptions, I was picking them up off the spinner rack. So I think Web of Spider-Man, either 32 or 33 was the first of that, and I was like, oh my God, at the end of this, he shoots Spider-Man, and then he's in the grave. Ah!
Well, I had a few contributions, but make no mistake about it. This was a story that Mark was trying. It was originally a Batman story, then a Wonder Man story, and finally he sold it to Tom DeFalco and Jim Owsley, who's now known as Christopher Priest, and they got it started. I kind of inherited it. My uh, the few changes, the three things I really did, and everything else is everyone else on that. They did an incredible job. So I almost feel guilty taking credit for it sometimes. But you know what the big thing for me was what you just mentioned at the end of that first story. Uh, Spider-Man's apparently dead. So I hated that Spider Man was appearing in more than one title. If it was all up to me, there'd be Amazing Spider Man. It could come out every week. Why not? Which is sort of what I was trying to do by having the story run through all the titles. I did not want someone like you read the story, have Spider Man be shot, and then next week another Spider Man comic comes out and he's all fine, and he's battling some other villain, and there's a footnote, and it either said this takes place before that Web of Spider-Man issue, or even worse, it says this takes place after it, ruining. Well, there, not that anyone may have really suspected that Spidey was dead,
Right.
but I wanted it to keep going, and I wanted it to feel incredibly important. And I think there wasn't, there were Marvel had lots of, I think there were lots of crossovers prior to that, but I wanted it to go from book to book, which the sales department really hated. The subscription department hated it. Marvel was always accused of only caring about money. The irony was they really weren't. Like I was far more mercenary than they were. Those people would come to me in the subscription and sales departments and say, you're going to force these people to have to buy the other books. Yeah.
Yeah, they should be because they were all because there was the three titles at that point. Webb had supplanted Marvel Team Up, and they all had unique creative teams and different artists and really a different take. There were certain villains that were unique to like the Peter Parker title, and there were certain villains you largely saw in Amazing Spider-Man. So they were even I could tell at that time that they were unique. So
Well, see, this goes back to your original question: what do editors do? When I came in, there was a bunch of things that I felt very strongly about. One was you know, Spider-Man, at that point before there was a whole Spider-Verse, he was just one guy.
right,
Understood with the X titles, you could have New Mutants and X-Men and something else, Excalibur. They were different groups, different characters. I didn't like having Spider-Man's life divvied up between these titles. Well, here, this will be the Daily Bugle one. This will be the college one. This will be his person. It's like I hated that. I wanted everything that made Spider-Man great and Amazing Spider-Man to be in every single title. I didn't want the books, you know, to just focus on, one facet of his life. I wanted them each to be equally important. One of the things I also did along those lines, which is what an editor does, I didn't like that there were other Spider-Man logos. I made all the Spider-Man logos look like the Amazing Spider-Man logo. One of the most iconic superhero logos in the world has got to be the Superman logo.
right,
And for the most part, they've been wise enough to just stick with that one wherever Superman appears. There was one point where I think they were actually following Marvel's example with Spider-Man, where they were coming up with these other Superman logos, and to my mind, you just don't do that. It's marketing, it's branding, it's almost like a character itself.
right.
Like that's Spider-Man. The other thing I didn't like was the black and white costume, but that's another story.
I
But
mean, that was my costume because that was when I became a reader. So, but I understand as someone who had been reading it for 25 years prior to that, I get where you're coming from, you know.
Well, it was a couple of things. In one instance, well, I almost have some regrets about it. Uh, when I asked Jim Shooter if I could go back to the red and blue costume, uh, he was almost too nice to me in the sense that he said, "Well, you're the editor." Uh, but what he said later on, when it was too late, when we were talking about it, he said, "I was kind of hoping I could keep the black and white costume long past the point where people would think, oh, I guess it's not a temporary thing. It's the permanent new costume, and then go back to it." And I thought, oh, that's great. Why didn't you say that to me at the time? I actually think that's a great idea. I would have gone along with that. But the main reason I wanted to change it wasn't because I was nostalgic for the red and blue costume. I just thought the black and white costume looked like a villain. So that you could see where that
And they
ultimately
made
led.
it one, you know. They made it into
Hey, you're
yeah.
looking at the guy.
Yes, I know. And it gets into my next question. So now we're getting into the later 1980s, and I hope my note's not wrong because, like I said, I was researching, and this is what it says in Wikipedia, that you were the one that brought Todd McFarlane to the table, correct?
Yeah, let me be really clear. I mean, Todd made a decision himself. At that point in time, there was a lot of
All right, sorry about that little glitch. All right, Todd McFarlane.
yeah. He's a very smart guy, and he noticed that there was a lot of Marvel's top people were leaving Marvel at that time to get better deals at DC.
I've heard.
So he thought, well, let me try going over to Marvel. And he was kind of warmly welcomed. I think partly it was not just wanting a better deal, but I think one of the jobs he did over at DC was Batman Year Two, and he put a lot into it, and he was hoping the audience would be able to see what he did. But they gave it to a very talented artist, Alfredo Alcala, who a lot of times, like say when he was at Marvel working on Conan, he'd get layouts by John Buscema, and Marvel wanted him to finish it up in his style. Use John's layouts, but the finished artwork is going to be heavily rendered and look like Alfredo's work. So I don't know what kind of direction, if any, he got at DC, but he just treated Todd's work the same way. So the layout still looked like Todd's, but the drawing looked like Alfredo, which was very frustrating to Todd. So yet another reason to come over to Marvel. When he came over, Mark Grunwald, he's always here in our story, uh, I think took Todd around to all the various editors to see if anyone would be interested in giving him work. And he got about 3 bites in the sense of, I think he did a G.I. Joe
Yep.
story.
Issue 60. I'm a huge G.I. Joe guy.
He was on the Hulk for quite a while with Peter David and Spider-Man. And what was interesting about that is he had no idea that I had already cleared with Jim Shooter that I was going to return to the red and blue costume. So this is what an editor dreams of. Like sometimes we don't have to reveal everything to the creators. Particularly if it works to our advantage. So Todd, even though he's this new guy, he's coming in, and in a sense, he's being considered for one of the top books, Amazing Spider-Man, and he lays down a condition. Well, I only want to do it if he goes back to the red and blue costume. Okay, sir.
You drive a hard bargain.
Exactly. So that was just very, it was serendipity. It worked out very well. Todd
Right.
is brilliant, uh, and and it was just what Spider-Man needed. Let me just elaborate a little bit on that. I think one of the things I did in a previous life at Marvel was I wrote Spidey super stories, and I
Loved him.
think there's many people who like it and sing the virtues of it. I'm very proud of it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, and on the other hand, there was sometimes the impact is it could create an impression that, say, Spider-Man was for very young kids. And, when you're, as you said, if you're 11 or younger, you're very conscious of how you're perceived, and you don't want to be seen reading baby stuff. And Spidey Super Stories was definitely for a very young audience. So I think, in a weird way, it certainly wasn't intended for this purpose. The black and white costume sort of created a more sophisticated Spider-Man that fans like yourself could say, no, 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 I'm not reading that baby version of Spider-Man. This is the new, darker, grimmer, mature Spider-Man. So I think it played an important role in
Yeah.
grabbing attention, and then I think Todd was another factor in that the look of the books for so long was emulating John Romita, that this was an artist who was, along with his, cohorts that wound up creating Image, were sort of like updating the look of the comics in an exciting new way. So that played a big role as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. For me, being used to kind of what you described, like Alex Saviuk style or like Sal Buscema style, I was very used to that. So yeah, when Todd came in, it was a big departure. And I didn't really necessarily know what to make of it and didn't know that I was looking at the art of, someone that would become this great icon pushing things into the 21st century. This is wild, wild stuff under.
The irony right now, and I wonder if you share the same opinion, is like there's, at this point in time when we're doing this interview, they just recently, released some photos of from the new Spider-Man movie that
Right.
they're shooting now, and they're saying, there's new photos online of Spider-Man in his new costume, and it's exactly the Ramita costume.
Right. Yeah, it's new to you. You always struggle to remember that there's them, which is still the them that didn't read comics and still doesn't, but they go to the movies, right? So they
That's
think Spider-Man is theirs. Where really it belongs to guys like us because we know exactly what you said. I mean, I started reading Spider-Man in 1986. My first issue was 278. I have a framed copy of it in my den. It was the white cover. It was Flash Thompson in jail. The Scourge tried to take him out. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about.
yeah, sure.
And then because I became such a big fan, and comics were still cheap. I had a local shop that I was able to buy backwards almost everything, just go because they were, it was $1 or $2 or something to buy, issues less than 100 at that point of ASM. So yeah, a big collection back in those days. But anyway, it's wild. Well, wrapping up, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Tell me, what are you working on these days? What's going on for you?
Well, a while back, well, after Marvel, I became editor in chief at Topps Comics.
Right.
After that, I wound up working for Stan Lee again as his senior editor and writer. And when that sort of went kablooey, I came back, and along with Terry Nantier, we started a publishing company called Paper Cuts, the idea being graphic novels for kids. And we did that for close to 20 years. And a few years ago, we sold the company to Mad Cave Studios, who are doing very well with it, and as well with their other imprints. So that's exciting. And now I'm sort of, after being home for quite a while, working on a career memoir and what have you. And I even like to say that after I left Marvel originally in '92, so 27 years later, while I was still at Paper Cuts, they contacted me to write introductions to various volumes of Marvel Masterworks.
Oh,
Uh,
great stuff. Yeah.
Stories that either edited, was assistant editor, or wrote, and it was very. I mean, this is something. I remember Stan Lee was the guy that wrote the introductions to the Masterworks when they first started. So suddenly to be in that position was a lot of fun. I liked working with the editor Corey. Unfortunately, I just got, I think, my last one,
Yeah, that's what I
a
heard.
Marvel 2-in-1 Volume 8, because I don't know, I think it's because of the tariffs, and the books are printed in China, and they're already so expensive that
Yeah.
I think they're I think the official word is they're on hiatus. So
Right.
I hope they come back. I just wrote something for Paper Cuts in one of their Smurfs volumes about the Marvel Smurfs comics. Uh, they did 3 issues back in the 80s, and in a Treasury edition and mini comics. So, I'm bouncing around, but I would love. I'm getting a little sick of being at home. I'd love the idea of going into an office again and being hands on and making comics and working with creators. So, if there's any of you comics publishers out there looking for an editor in chief or an editor, let's talk. But
You bet.
I'm having a lot of fun.
That's good. Yeah, we've interviewed a lot of folks like yourself and writers and stuff, and I share these when they come out, and I'll share them around. Obviously, I'll share this one around. Who knows what will come of it?
Yeah, well, I've been very lucky throughout my career. Like going back to your very first question, how did I get started? I mean, when people ask me that question, if I'm at a convention, which I'll be at this weekend in Boston at Fan Expo, uh, they're hoping to get useful information, so they might be able to work in comics. So telling them that I just sent a postcard in and got hired, you could see the look of frustration when they hear that answer.
Oh my goodness. Well, Jim, this has been absolutely spectacular. Where can people find you? Are
And
you active on social media?
and Webby, and you said it was spectacular. I couldn't resist. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I know. I completely understand. Can people find you on social media if they want to interact with you?
I'm on Facebook. That's the best way to find
I
me.
hear you. Excellent. Well,
Big
thanks for joining me. Patreons, thanks for tuning in. If you're listening to this on our free feed, definitely visit patreon.com/Secret Friends Unite. You can try us out for 7 days for free. And my guest has been Jim Salicrup. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I
All
enjoyed it.
right.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast services around the galaxy, as well as video on our YouTube channel. You can support Secret Friends Unite by becoming a Patreon member, get bonus programs and more over at patreon.com/secretfriendsunite. Join our Discord community for even more discussions on all things geek. For all the latest updates on Secret Friends Unite, make sure to follow us on Threads at secret.friends.unite and visit secretfriendsunite.com. Find our merchandise at TeePublic and Redbubble. Thanks for listening, and may the Force live long and prosper.